Hey guys, John again. I want to walk through another dry run of a detection that we were asked to write. This is being able to check past the hash using Crackmapexec. What Crackmapexec does, is a very handy tool. It basically can be run from a Linux box. It's a Python script in most cases, where it'll actually leverage some of the WMI properties and remoting capabilities on a lot of Windows workstations. So a couple of things about this particular detection and the way that Crackmapexec behaves that make it a pretty high fidelity detection. First thing you can look at is I actually have a flow ID here. And you'll notice in most cases on Xtrop, one flow ID will correspond to a particular protocol. But what we do find with some of the remote procedure call stuff and some of the Microsoft's transactions is that a flow ID can actually traverse multiple protocols. And this lends itself to a pretty high fidelity detection. So you can see here, this flow ID has some Microsoft RPC request events as well as some NTLM events. And so here you can see as we walk through, we can actually get a user ID before we start seeing interfaces and operations, right? So, so let's look at the trigger and see how we want to detect this, right? So the first one is this WebM check. We are using the session table a little bit here, but but not too much. But the first part, because they're in the same flow, we still need to use the session table because all of these interfaces and operations occur within the same flow, and I need to make sure that they occur in the same order so that I can properly evaluate the transaction and assert that it is a WebM remote process that's being launched. Ergo, more than likely Crackmapexec. So the first thing we'll log, or the first thing we'll write to the flow store, is the actual flow ID, right? So during the NTLM transaction, when it authenticates, we'll write both the user and the flow ID into the flow store. This is different than the session table. So if they occur within the same flow, we can reuse them. So that's why you see here, I'm reusing them on the RPC request. So I'm taking tuples that are part of the NTLM message event, and I'm reusing them, and I'm using them to add and decorate additional context in the RPC request. So then I make a nice variable here for the interface and operation combination. As long as that's not null. Here I'm going to log it because I want you to be able to see it, but I'll log that activity. And then I'm going to iterate through them, right? And if you'll look, I can actually show you what this looks like. You'll see here, let me go out to 30 minutes. What this looks like is you actually get a login, an NTLM login, a get object, and an exec method. So if these three occur in the same order, then that's a very high likelihood, probably 99.9% likelihood that someone has, at a minimum, well, it's 100% likelihood that they've run a remote process, right? And we want to flag those and make our customers aware of them. And in this case, we want to also append the actual user ID to this. So this is just a walkthrough of a dry run of an existing detection where we're using a series of events as the criteria instead of something signature, or, to a certain extent it's behavioral, but it's how the process behaves, not so much how the user behaves. So let's walk through this. Let's see what this looks like, right? So I'm going to go ahead and come over here to my shell. I'm going to execute Crackmapexec. I'm going to pass the domain admin hash, and I'm going to type ipconfig all, right? So I'm going to execute a command. So I'm not using psexec. You can maybe try to stay under the radar from our psexec detection. I'm just going to try to run a basically, shell over the WebM channel. So I'll click this. It's going to log in, and there you see we were completely successful. Let me bring this down to the last 5 minutes. And there we see, we walk through, we see the initial instance created, but then we see our medley here of different operations, of different RPC operations, right? We see the login, the NTLM login, the get object, and the exec method. All three checked, all three of them were observed here. We're iterating through these, right? We look for NTLM login, we look for get object, we see that. we look for exec method, and then of course if we see that, then we're going to assert that somebody has executed. It could be a third-party piece of software, but in this case, because we're in a purple team, we're looking for Crackmapexec. We pivot over to our detections. You see here, remote process open via WebM for the user administrator. And we have an offender. And we basically have a handy little detection that should fire every time somebody runs Crackmapexec and either passes a hash or actually authenticates to it directly. We should be able to see that as well. So again, this is the dry run for the Crackmapexec detection. Thanks a lot.